Rebecca Daniels didn't scream. She'd learned a long time ago that screaming only made her father angrier and the crowd more entertained. So she stood in the middle of Bitter Creek's main street, in the full glare of a summer sun that showed no mercy, and she let them look. Let them whisper. Let them decide her worth in coins and casual cruelty. She was 24 years old, and she had never once been asked what she wanted. Until today. Until him. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1878 came to Bitter Creek mean and without apology. By 10 in the morning, the dirt on Main Street had already baked to the color of old bone, and the men gathered outside Caleb Pruitt's feed store were already on their second round of whiskey, even though the general store hadn't properly opened yet. Heat like that made men restless. It made them loud. And on this particular morning, it made Hector Daniels brave enough to do the thing he'd been threatening to do for the better part of 6 months. He dragged his daughter out of their house by the wrist. Not gently. Not with any pretense of a father escorting a daughter somewhere. He grabbed her the way a man grabs a mule he's grown tired of feeding, with impatience and a kind of contempt that didn't bother to disguise itself. Rebecca didn't fight him. She'd tried fighting once 2 winters ago, and she still had a thin white scar above her left eyebrow to mark the occasion. So she walked when he pulled, and she kept her eyes forward and her jaw set, and she told herself the same thing she'd been telling herself every morning for the past 3 years. Survive today. Just today. The men outside Pruitt's store fell quiet when they saw Hector coming. Then the whispers started, the low, rotten kind that traveled fast in a town this size. "He's really doing it," somebody muttered. "Told you he would," came the answer. Hector stopped in the middle of the street right where the 2 wagon ruts crossed, and everybody could see clear from the saloon to the livery. He let go of Rebecca's wrist. She didn't run. There was nowhere to run to in Bitter Creek that Hector Daniels couldn't find her before nightfall. He put his hands on his hips and raised his voice loud enough to carry. "I got a woman here," he announced. "Good health, strong back, 24 years old. Any man interested in a wife I'm hearing offers today." The silence that followed was the kind Rebecca felt in her chest, like a physical weight. Then Caleb Pruitt laughed, and once Caleb laughed, the rest of them found permission. "What's wrong with her, Hector?" someone called from the boardwalk. "She cross-eyed simple." "She's neither," Hector said. "She's just a woman I can't afford to keep." Rebecca looked at the ground. She looked at the dried mud cracked between the wagon ruts. She studied it like it was the most important thing in the world, because if she looked up, if she let herself look at any of those faces, she would feel it. All of it. And she couldn't afford to feel it right now. "I'll give you $15, Pruitt said, ambling forward. He was a thick man, soft in the belly and hard in the eyes. He looked at Rebecca the way he looked at livestock. "She know how to cook." "She can cook," Hector said. "She obedient?" Hector paused just long enough to be telling. "She's manageable." Pruitt reached out and put his hand under Rebecca's chin, tilting her face up the way you'd check a horse's teeth. She let him. She stood perfectly still, and she breathed through her nose, and she thought about the creek behind their house, about the way it sounded in the early morning before her father woke up, the only 20 minutes of any day that had ever truly belonged to her. "I'll go 16, said Roy Hatch from somewhere to the left. 18, said someone she didn't recognize. She was being auctioned, right there in the middle of Bitter Creek's main street, in front of the mercantile and the barber shop and the women who stood in doorways pretending not to watch while watching everything. She was being auctioned like a parcel of bad land, not for what she was worth, but for whatever a man in this town felt like spending on a Tuesday morning. Pruitt dropped her chin. 20, he said, and he said it with the finality of a man who'd already decided. 22. Hatch again. 25. Pruitt annoyed now. Rebecca closed her eyes. Creek in the morning. Just the creek. The sound of water over stones. $30. A new voice. Quiet. So quiet, she almost missed it underneath all the noise. But it cut through. Something about that voice cut through the way a cold wind cuts through a crowd on a hot day, unexpected and impossible to ignore. She opened her eyes. He was standing at the edge of it all, just off the boardwalk in front of the hardware store, one shoulder against the post arms loose at his sides. He wasn't a big man in the showy way that Pruitt was big. He was lean and weathered, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been set against something difficult for so long it had forgotten how to unclench. He wore a plain brown coat despite the heat, and his boots were trail-worn, and he was looking at Hector Daniels with an expression so flat and calm it made Hector shift his weight. Nobody seemed to know him. That much was clear from the looks exchanged on the boardwalk. "Who are you?" Pruitt demanded. "Thomas Hayes." He said it the way men say their name when they've had occasion to make it mean something. Just the name, nothing added. "You passing through?" "I was." He didn't move from the post. $30. Pruitt's jaw tightened. 32. 40. That stopped the bidding. $40 was 2 months' wages for most men in Bitter Creek. And Thomas Hayes had said it the way you'd say, "Good morning," like the number cost him nothing at all. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Rebecca, doing the calculation that men like him always did, deciding whether she was worth more than $40 of inconvenience. His eyes said no. "Fine," he muttered, and stepped back. Hector Daniels had already crossed to Thomas Hayes before the word was fully out of Pruitt's mouth. Rebecca watched her father's hand extend, watched the stranger count coins and paper into it without expression, watched Hector's fingers close around the money with a speed that turned her stomach. $40. That was what she was worth to the man who'd raised her. Thomas Hayes tucked his wallet back inside his coat. Then he looked at Rebecca for the first time, looked at her directly, the way almost no one in this town ever looked at her, like she was a person standing in front of him rather than a problem requiring management. "Miss," he said. He touched the brim of his hat. "My horse is at the livery. Whenever you're ready." She stared at him. "Whenever I'm—" She stopped. Started again. "You just bought me." "I paid your father $40, he said. "I didn't buy you. Can't buy a person." "You just did." "No, ma'am." His voice was patient and very even. "I bought your father's claim on you, which he didn't have a legal right to make in the first place. But $40 seemed like the fastest way out of this street, and I had the impression you'd been standing here long enough." Rebecca looked around. The crowd had already started breaking up, men drifting back to their whiskey and their conversations now that the entertainment was over. Hector Daniels was already heading back toward the house, money in hand, not looking back, not once. She turned back to Thomas Hayes. "What do you want from me?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question seriously, which surprised her. "Nothing you're not willing to give," he said finally. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got right now." He straightened from the post. "I've got a spread about 3 hours north of here, up in the high country. Needs work. I need somebody who knows how to run a house, manage provisions, handle the kitchen garden. I'll pay wages, same as I'd pay anyone." He paused. "You can leave any time you want. That's not a condition. It's just a fact." She laughed at that, a short, broken sound that surprised even her. "Men don't generally lead with, 'You can leave.'" "I'm not most men." She studied him. The weathered face, the gray at his temples, the way he stood with his weight balanced, like a man used to being ready for something, but who wasn't threatening her right now. Not even slightly. "Why?" she asked. "Why'd you stop? You don't know me." Something moved across his expression, quick, carefully controlled. Not quite pain. Something older than pain. "Because I've seen that look before," he said. "On someone who didn't have anyone stop." He didn't explain that. She didn't ask. Not yet. "My name's Rebecca," she said. "I know." He nodded toward the road out of town. "You ready, Miss Rebecca?" She looked back at the house at the end of the block. The house where she'd been born, where her mother had died when she was 9, where her father had spent the years since building a resentment he'd never once taken responsibility for. There was nothing in that house she wanted badly enough to go back for. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Thomas Hayes's horse was a bay gelding named Buck Solid and unimpressed by the world, which Rebecca liked immediately. Thomas didn't make her ride double. He'd already arranged for a rented mare from the liveryman, a small gray with a gentle mouth paid for out of what appeared to be a supply of calm, practical money. They rode out of Bitter Creek without ceremony. Nobody saw them off. Nobody waved. The town went back to being itself the moment they cleared the main street, and Rebecca felt the weight of it lift off her shoulders with each yard they put between themselves and those buildings, like shucking a coat that had been soaked through with water. For a long time, they didn't talk. The trail wound up through scrub and pale grass, the heat pressing down with its full summer authority. And Thomas Hayes rode with his eyes on the country ahead of them, and his hands easy on the reins, and he didn't try to fill the silence with anything. She appreciated that more than she could have said. It was Rebecca who finally spoke. "You said you'd seen that look before," she said, "on someone who didn't have anyone stop." He didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the trail. "My wife," he said. "Margaret. Her father was a harder man than yours, I think. By the time I got to her, I was too late to stop most of what he'd done." He paused. "Not too late to marry her, but too late to undo it." "Where is she now?" "Gone," he said. 8 years ago. Fever took her and our boy both same winter." He said it quietly, without drama, the way a man says something he's made peace with on the outside while keeping whatever it costs him on the inside. "I went out to the mountains after that. Didn't talk to much of anybody for about 4 years. And then I got tired of being alone with just the mountain for company." He glanced at her briefly. "Mountain's a good listener, but a terrible conversationalist." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "How long have you had the spread?" "About 2 years. Built most of it myself. It's not much yet." He was quiet for a moment. "It's honest, though. The land's honest. What you put into it, it gives back. More or less." "More or less," she repeated. "Weather gets a vote," he said. "Always weather's got a vote." They rode in silence again. The country opened up ahead of them as the trail climbed the scrub, giving way to taller grass and scattered pine, and Rebecca breathed in the smell of it, warm pine and dry earth, and something that wasn't Bitter Creek, and she felt something cautious and unfamiliar starting to uncurl in her chest. She didn't trust it yet. She'd learned a long time ago not to trust the moments that felt like they might be good. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "Thomas?" "Thomas." She tried the word carefully. "What happens if it doesn't work out the arrangement?" "Then you go wherever you were planning to go next," he said simply. "I'll give you train fare, whatever direction you're pointed." "You'd do that." "I just said I would." "Men say things." "I know they do." He looked at her again, steady and direct. "I'm telling you what I'll do. You'll figure out whether I'm the kind of man who means it. That'll take some time, and I can't shortcut it for you." He turned back to the trail. "All I can tell you is that you're not a prisoner, Miss Rebecca. You never will be long as I've got anything to say about it." She looked at the back of his horse's ears. She looked at the mountains ahead of them, blue and enormous against the summer sky. Survive today, just today, but for the first time in longer than she could remember today, felt like something it might be possible to survive without losing the rest of herself in the process. The spread was exactly what Thomas had said. It was not much, but honest. A log cabin, solid built, chinked well enough to hold heat in winter. A kitchen garden that needed attention but wasn't beyond saving, she could see that much just walking the rows. A barn, a well, a root cellar, a porch that ran the length of the front and faced west so you caught the evening light. Bunkhouse is around back, Thomas said, leading the horses to the corral. You'll have the cabin. I'll take the bunkhouse. She turned to look at him. You're giving me the cabin. You're the one keeping house. Makes more sense. And where will you sleep? I told you, bunkhouse. You built this cabin. And I can sleep in the bunkhouse. He uncinched Buck's saddle. I'm not asking for anything, Miss Rebecca. I want to be real clear about that. This is a job. You do the work, I pay wages. We're square. Whatever else you've been told about how this sort of thing works, I'd ask you to set it aside and judge me by what I actually do. She stood there in the late afternoon heat, dusty from the ride, still wearing the same dress she'd been wearing when her father dragged her into the street that morning, and she looked at this man she'd known for less than a day. This quiet, careful, gray-templed man with his honest land and his dead wife and his willingness to sleep in the bunkhouse. And she tried to find the trick of it. She couldn't find it. Supper? She said finally. What about it? I'll make supper, if you've got provisions worth working with. He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him, a slight easing at the corners of his mouth. Pantries through the kitchen door. Should be flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. Coffee, she said. That's something. I'm a simple man, he said, but I do require coffee. She walked toward the cabin. At the porch steps, she stopped and looked back at him. Thomas. He looked up from the saddle. Thank you, she said, for stopping. In the street. I know I didn't say it before. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and turned back to the horse. Get that coffee started, Miss Rebecca, he said. Trail makes a man simple-minded about some things. She went inside, and the mountain, enormous and ancient and entirely indifferent, watched the summer light fall across the high country like it had watched 1,000 such evenings before, without judgment, without hurry, with all the time in the world. The first week passed the way hard things sometimes do, 1 hour at a time. Each one survived before the next one started. Rebecca learned the rhythms of the spread the way she'd learned everything else in her life, by watching, by listening, by keeping her mouth shut, until she understood what she was looking at. The kitchen garden needed more than attention. It needed a firm hand and a clear plan. But she had both, and she threw herself into it, the way a woman throws herself into work, when work is the only thing standing between her and thoughts she's not ready to have. Thomas was up before dawn every morning. She could hear him moving in the yard before the light came, quiet and deliberate, the sound of a man who'd been living alone long enough that he'd forgotten to make noise. She'd lie in the cabin and listen to the creak of the well handle, the soft stamp of the horses in the corral, the occasional low word he spoke to Buck, like the horse was a reasonable conversation partner. She didn't think he knew she was awake. She wasn't sure why she didn't tell him. By the end of the 3rd day, she had the kitchen garden in order. By the end of the 4th, she'd reorganized the pantry, mended the hole in the porch screen, and identified 3 places where the cabin roof was likely to give trouble come fall. Thomas came in for supper that 4th evening and stopped in the doorway. You moved everything, he said. The flour was next to the salt pork, she said, not looking up from the pot. Moisture transfer. You'd have had weevils by August. A pause. I've had weevils before. Not while I'm running this kitchen, you won't. Another pause. Longer. Then, and she heard it clearly, even with her back turned, he pulled out his chair and sat down without another word, which she understood to be from Thomas Hayes a fairly significant concession. She put the plate in front of him. He looked at it. What is this? He asked. Beans, she said, with the salt pork and the dried peppers from the garden, and cornbread. Where'd the peppers come from? I told you, the garden, the back row. You planted them and then ignored them for apparently several months. He stared at the plate. I didn't know they'd taken. They took. She sat down across from him. You're not a careful gardener, Thomas. I'm a rancher. You're a man who planted things and walked away from them, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her, then really looked the way he'd looked at her in the street, direct and unguarded. "Is that a commentary on the garden?" She held his gaze. "It might be a commentary on several things." He picked up his fork, took a bite, didn't speak for a moment. Then, "This is the best meal I've had in 2 years." That is a depressing statement about your last 2 years. He almost smiled. Almost. "Yes," he said. "It is." They ate in the kind of silence that had started somewhere over the past 4 days to feel less like absence and more like presence. Like a room with furniture in it, instead of a room waiting to be furnished. Rebecca noticed the shift and filed it away without comment. She was good at filing things away. It was a skill she'd developed young and perfected under necessity. What she hadn't perfected, what she'd never been given occasion to practice, was what to do when someone was simply kind to her without wanting anything back. Thomas paid her at the end of the first week. Exact wages, exact as promised, laid on the table in the morning beside her coffee cup. She stood and looked at the coins and felt something crack open in her chest that she couldn't name. Not gratitude exactly. Something rawer than gratitude. Something that had to do with the fact that she'd never in her life been paid for work she'd done. Had never been told her labor had a value that could be counted out and handed over. She picked up the coins. She didn't say thank you, her throat wouldn't cooperate. She just put the money in her apron pocket and went back to the stove. Thomas didn't comment. He drank his coffee and went out to the horses. She stood at the stove for a full minute before she trusted her eyes to be dry. It was on the 9th day that the first sign of trouble came. She'd ridden the gray mare down to the creek to wash linens, a practical errand, nothing more, when she came across the fence. Or rather, what was left of it. 3 posts had been pulled out of the ground and tossed aside, clean and deliberate, the kind of destruction that takes effort and makes a point. The wire had been coiled and left in a heap nearby. Not stolen. Left. So whoever had done it wanted Thomas to find it and understand the message. She brought the news back to the spread, with the damp linens still rolled in the saddlebag. Thomas was in the barn when she rode in. She didn't dismount. "Your south fence line," she said. 3 posts pulled. The wire's been left, but the posts are done." He came out of the barn. His expression didn't change, but something in his jaw went tight. "Which section?" "Past the creek bend. Where the property marker is." "How do you know where the property marker is?" "I looked at your land documents last night," she said. "You left them on the table. I read them." He stopped. "You read them?" "You have a boundary dispute on your southern line," she said. "Your deed shows one measurement. The county record I found in the stack shows a different one. Someone redrew that line." Thomas Hayes was very still. "Where did you find the county record?" "Bottom of the deed box, folded inside an old survey map." She kept her eyes on him. "Thomas, who's been pressing you on the south line?" He let out a slow breath through his nose. "Man named Garrett Cole. He runs the Rafter Sea about 6 miles south. Been sending men up here for 3 months telling me my fence is over his property." "Is it?" "No." The word was flat and certain. "My deed is right. The county record you found, that's a forgery. I've known it since spring. I just can't prove it yet." Rebecca absorbed this. "And the posts. Warning," he said. "Cole's way of telling me he's done waiting." Warning before what? Thomas didn't answer that. He walked past her toward the south fence, and the set of his shoulders told her the answer was something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Something worse than a fence dispute. She turned the mare and followed him. "I'm coming with you," she said. "You don't need to." "I read the documents," she said. "I know what I'm looking at. You might need a witness." He stopped walking, turned to look at her. "Miss Rebecca," he said carefully, "Cole's men aren't—" "I've dealt with difficult men my entire life," she said. "I think my credentials are established." She kept her voice level. "I'm coming." He studied her for a moment, that same direct measuring look. Then he turned back toward the fence line without another word. Which was, she was learning Thomas Hayes's version of all right. They found two of Cole's men at the fence line. One was still on horseback. The other was leaning against a pulled post with the easy confidence of a man who expected no resistance. The one on horseback spoke first. "Hayes, Cole wants a conversation." "Cole knows where my place is," Thomas said. "He wants you to come to him." "I reckon he can come to me." The man on the ground pushed off the post. He was younger than the first, with something in his eyes that ran cold. "That ain't the invitation. Cole's real patient, Mr. Hayes. He's been real patient. But he sent us to let you know the patience has got a limit." "The limit being what?" Rebecca said. Both men looked at her. The cold-eyed one looked longer. "Who's she?" he asked Thomas. "She works with me," Thomas said. His voice had gone very quiet. "Answer her question." "Cole wants the south quarter," the horseman said. "He'll pay fair value." "It's not for sale," Thomas said. "It's not really yours to decide," the cold-eyed one said. "Way the county sees it, that south quarter's been Cole land for the past 8 years. Deed error. Happens." "The only error in any deed around here is the one Cole paid somebody to make," Rebecca said. Dead silence. The cold-eyed man took one step toward her, and Thomas moved not fast, not dramatically, just a single step that put him between the man and Rebecca with a completeness that left no ambiguity about how far that conversation was going to go. "You done," Thomas said. The man stopped. He looked at Thomas for a long moment, with the calculating look of someone deciding if a confrontation was worth the cost this morning. Apparently it wasn't. "Tell Cole to send a lawyer," Thomas said, "if he's got a legal claim. Otherwise, keep his men off my line." They rode back toward the spread without speaking for a while. The summer heat pressed down, relentless and indifferent. "That deed forgery," Rebecca said finally. "You need the original survey, the one the county record was copied from." "I know." "Do you know where it is?" "The county land office in Millhaven," he said, "which is 40 miles east, and the clerk there is a man named Billings, who is, as far as I can tell, on Cole's payroll." "How do you know?" "Because every time I've gone in there in the past 3 months to request the original survey, Billings tells me it's misfiled and he'll have to look into it." He paused. "And then nothing happens." Rebecca rode in silence for a moment, working through it. "The U.S. Land Office," she said. "Federal. Cole can't buy the federal office." Thomas glanced at her. "No, he can't. But the federal land office is in Denver." "Can you write?" "I can write." "Then write," she said. "Write the federal land office in Denver and request a certified copy of the original survey. It's public record. They can't refuse a written request from a property holder." He was quiet for a long moment. "How do you know all this?" "My mother taught school for 8 years before she married my father," Rebecca said. "She taught me everything she knew, and then she died, which I think was partly just getting out while she still could." She kept her eyes on the trail. "Land law isn't complicated if you know how to read. The complication is getting people to follow it." Thomas said nothing, but she felt him looking at her with that measuring quality again, like a man revising an estimate upward. "I'll write tonight," he said. "Good," she said. "Write tonight, and I'll write it to the post in Bitter Creek tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said firmly. "I'm choosing to. There's a difference." She glanced at him. "Same difference you tried to explain to me in that street, I think." He held her gaze for a beat. Then he faced forward again, and something in the line of his shoulders changed, a loosening almost imperceptible, like a man who'd been carrying something alone and had just carefully allowed someone else to take hold of one end. "All right," he said quietly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me when we get the survey." But that wasn't the worst thing that happened that week. The worst thing happened 4 days later when Rebecca rode back from the post office in Bitter Creek with a letter in her saddlebag and a cold feeling in her stomach that she was working hard to keep off her face. She found Thomas splitting wood in the yard. He looked up when she came in, read something in her expression immediately, and put down the axe. "What happened?" he said. She dismounted, held out the letter. It was addressed to Thomas Hayes from a lawyer in Millhaven representing one Garrett Cole. It stated in the flat and careful language that lawyers used when they were doing things they knew were wrong, that the property known as the Hayes Spread, comprising approximately 340 acres in the high country north of Bitter Creek, had been determined by county survey to overlap with Cole land holdings. It requested that Thomas Hayes vacate the premises within 30 days, or face legal proceedings to enforce the boundary correction. 30 days, Rebecca said. Thomas read the letter. His face gave nothing away. He folded it once precisely and held it in his hand. "They moved fast," he said. "Faster than I expected." "The fence posts," she said. "That wasn't a warning. That was a clock starting." He looked at her. "They pulled the posts on purpose so you'd confront Cole's men," she said. "So they'd have a record of a confrontation. They're building a case, showing that you're difficult, that you refuse to negotiate in good faith." She took a breath. "Thomas, they're going to try to take this place. I know. And they think they can do it because the county clerk is in Cole's pocket and you're one man on a spread with no connections and no money for a real lawyer." "That's about right," he said. His voice was even, terrifyingly even, like the surface of a river above a drop she couldn't yet see. "You're not angry," she said. "I'm very angry," he said. "I've just had some practice keeping it where it belongs." He looked at the letter one more time. "I've got 30 days. "We've got 30 days, she said. He looked up. She held his gaze without flinching. "I can write the Federal Land Office request again, registered this time so there's a receipt. I can write the Territorial Governor's Land Office. Cole can't buy the governor's office either, not without more money than he's got. And I know—" She stopped. "You know what?" he said. "My mother. Before she married my father, she taught school in Millhaven for 6 years. She knew people there, good people." She kept her voice steady. "There's a woman named Dorothea Marsh. She was my mother's closest friend. She married a man named Calvin Marsh, who was the last I heard a surveyor, a federal surveyor." Thomas went very still. "If Calvin Marsh is still in Millhaven," Rebecca said, "and if Dorothea remembers my mother well enough to take a meeting, we might have someone who can look at that county record and tell a federal court exactly how recently it was altered." The silence stretched out. "Rebecca," Thomas said, and it was the first time, the absolute first time, he'd used just her name without the miss, without the formal distance he'd been careful to maintain. Just her name, plain and direct, and it landed somewhere in her chest, like a stone dropped in still water. "You should have told me this 4 days ago," he said. "I know," she said. "I was deciding whether to stay." He looked at her steadily. "And—" She met his eyes. "I'm still here," she said. The evening light came down across the high country, the way it always did, slow and golden and profligate, painting everything it touched with the illusion of warmth. Somewhere down the south fence line, Garrett Cole was building his case. Somewhere in Millhaven, a forged document sat in a county office waiting for someone to challenge it. And on the Hayes spread in the yard where Thomas Hayes had built something honest out of hard land and harder years, two people who had each lost more than they talked about stood 3 feet apart and looked at each other with the particular expression of those who have begun to understand that they are no longer entirely alone. Nobody said anything about that. It was too new, and they were both too careful, and the mountain had learned long ago that some things needed more time than a single evening. But the water had started moving, quiet and deep and gathering. And in Rebecca Daniels' pocket alongside her wages was the name Dorothea Marsh, written in her own hand on a folded piece of paper. She would ride to Millhaven in the morning. She hadn't told Thomas that part yet. She left before Thomas woke up. Not because she was afraid of the conversation, she'd stopped being afraid of conversations sometime around age 12, when fear became a luxury she couldn't afford. She left early because she needed the hours, because Millhaven was 40 miles, and the summer sun would be brutal by noon, and because some part of her knew that if Thomas looked at her across the breakfast table and said, "Don't go," she might actually listen to him. That scared her more than Cole's men did. She left a note on the table beside the coffee tin. 3 lines. Gone to Millhaven. Back by nightfall if the mare holds. Don't do anything about the south fence until I'm back. She signed it R and weighted it with the salt shaker and rode out into the gray pre-dawn before she could change her mind. The road to Millhaven was empty that early, which was the only thing that went smoothly all day. She found Dorothea Marsh's house by asking at the post office, which required explaining that she was Ellen Daniels' daughter, which required saying her mother's name out loud for the first time in longer than she could remember, which cost her something she hadn't budgeted for. She stood on the post office step for a full 30 seconds afterward, breathing through her nose before she trusted her face to be composed again. The woman who opened the Marsh door was 60 maybe, with white hair pinned back tight and eyes that were sharp and dark and immediately assessing. "You're Ellen's girl," Dorothea Marsh said before Rebecca opened her mouth. "Yes, ma'am." "You look like her." Something moved in the older woman's face, quick and complex and carefully managed. "I heard she passed 11 years ago." 12, Rebecca said. "Can I come in? I need your husband." Dorothea stepped back without another word, which was Rebecca was beginning to understand a trait of people who'd lived long enough to know when to skip the preamble. Calvin Marsh was a small, neat man with ink-stained fingers and the precise movements of someone who spent his life measuring things that had to be exactly right. He listened to Rebecca without interrupting, which she appreciated. She laid out everything: the deed, the forged county record, the 30-day notice, Garrett Cole, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You have the county record with you?" he asked. She pulled it from her coat. He took it, carried it to the window, and held it up to the light. The silence lasted approximately 40 seconds. "This was redrawn within the last year," he said. Rebecca's breath stopped. "You can tell that from looking at it." "I can tell that from the ink oxidation and the paper pressing," he said. "This document has been treated to look older than it is. It's not a bad job. But whoever did it didn't account for the fact that the original survey markers in this county were recorded using a notation system that changed in 1872. Whoever forged this used the post-1872 notation on a document that's supposed to predate it by 8 years. He set the paper down and looked at her. "This would not survive scrutiny from a federal examiner." "Can you be that examiner?" she asked. "I'm a retired federal surveyor," he said. "I still hold the commission. I can submit a formal affidavit to the Territorial Land Office." He paused. "It won't stop Cole immediately, but it gives your man grounds to file a federal challenge. And a federal challenge takes the whole matter out of the county court's hands." "How long does that take?" "The affidavit, I can have it written by tomorrow morning." Rebecca let out a breath that she felt in every muscle of her body. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said in a tone that reminded her so precisely of her own voice from 2 days ago that she almost smiled. "You need to get that affidavit to the Federal Land Office in Denver within 10 days, or Cole's lawyer files first and controls the narrative." He looked at her steadily. "Can your man get to Denver in 10 days?" "Yes," she said. She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway. She was back on the mare and heading out of Millhaven by 2 in the afternoon, with Calvin Marsh's promise of a written affidavit, and Dorothea's hand pressed briefly to her cheek at the door, warm and dry and smelling of lavender, and that unexpected kindness nearly undid her completely. She held it together until she was out of Millhaven. Then she rode fast. She was 3 miles out of Bitter Creek when they found her. 2 riders coming up fast from a side trail cutting across to intercept her on the main road. She heard them before she saw them, and she didn't hesitate. She pushed the mare hard, leaning forward, looking for the gap in the road where the tree cover thickened and gave her options. But the gray was tired from the morning's 40 miles and the rider's horses were fresh, and they were alongside her within 30 seconds. "Pull up," the cold-eyed one said. The same man from the fence line. "Pull up now, or I take the reins." She pulled up. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. "You been to Millhaven," he said. It wasn't a question. "Cole's got people who watch the road." "Then Cole knows I enjoy a long ride," she said. "Don't." He moved his horse closer. "Whatever you did up there, whatever you found, it's done. You understand Cole's patience is gone, and he doesn't want anybody getting hurt, but he will do what he has to do." "Is that a threat?" she asked. "It's information," he said. "Take your man and go. There's spreads in other counties. Cole'll pay fair value, and you walk away whole, and that's more than most people get from him." She looked at him with an even gaze. "And if we don't—" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "I'll pass that along," she said. "You do that." He pulled back. "And tell Hayes that the next time Cole sends men to that fence line, they won't be pulling posts." They let her go. She rode the rest of the way back to the spread with her jaw set and her mind running fast, cataloging options and timing and what Cole knew versus what he thought he knew. Thomas was in the yard when she came in. He'd been waiting, she could tell from the way he was standing arms crossed, that particular stillness of a man who has been still for too long. "You're late," he said. "I know. It's nearly dark." "I know Thomas." She dismounted. "I found Calvin Marsh. He's a federal surveyor. He examined the county record." "I know who Calvin Marsh is," Thomas said. "Rebecca, you rode 40 miles alone in Cole's territory without telling me where you were going." "I left a note. A 3-line note." "I'm back," she said. "And I have good news and bad news. Which do you want?" He looked at her for a long, level moment. The muscle in his jaw was doing something complicated. "Good news," he said finally. "The county record is a forgery and Calvin Marsh can prove it. He's writing an affidavit tonight. Federal-level testimony. It takes the case out of county court entirely." Thomas went very still. "And the bad news? Cole has someone watching the road to Millhaven. His men stopped me on the way back." She kept her voice even. "They know I went there. They don't know why yet, but they know I went. And the man said the next time they come to the fence line, it won't be to pull posts." The silence that followed was the densest she'd felt since she arrived. "Did they touch you?" Thomas asked. His voice had gone quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet lower flatter, with something underneath it that she recognized as the controlled front edge of a fury he was keeping on a very short leash. "No," she said. "They didn't touch me." He nodded once. He turned and walked toward the barn. "Thomas." "I need a minute," he said without turning around. "Give me a minute." She gave him 5. Then she went to the kitchen and built up the fire and put water on and stood at the stove, listening to the sounds from the barn, the low, steady voice he used on the horses. The occasional movement of something being set down carefully. The kind of sounds a man makes when he is working very hard to be methodical about something that has made him want to be the opposite. When he came back in, he was composed, thoroughly composed in the way that took effort. He sat down at the table. She put coffee in front of him. "We need to move fast," she said. "I know. The affidavit will be done by morning. We need someone to ride to Millhaven to collect it, and then ride straight to Denver." "That's 200 miles round trip," he said. "Can you go?" "If I leave this place empty, Cole's men will be on that fence line before I'm an hour out." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I need someone here." "Then I'll go," she said. Thomas looked up. "No." "Thomas?" "No," he said more firmly. "They stopped you once. If they know you're carrying a federal affidavit, they'll do more than stop you." "Then we send someone else." "Who?" she thought. Jim Heller, she said. He runs stock for Patterson's outfit north of here. He owes you. You told me yourself he borrowed your... Jim Heller is a good man, Thomas said. But he's not someone you send against Cole's network. If they find out what he's carrying, then we don't tell him what he's carrying, she said. We tell him it's a land survey request, which is technically true. She sat down across from him. Thomas, I need you to trust me on this. He looked at her for a long time. I do trust you, he said. Quietly, like it had cost him something to discover that was true. Then let me do what I'm good at, she said. You handle the spread and the fence line. Let me handle the paper. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest unguarding like a shutter eased open by a fraction. He nodded. All right, he said. We do it your way. They had 2 days before Cole moved. Rebecca knew it before it happened, the way you know weather is coming, a quality of tension in everything, the spread itself seeming to hold its breath. Thomas knew it too. She could feel it in the way he moved, always alert, always with one eye on the south. It was the morning of the 3rd day when they heard the horses. Not 2 men this time, more. She was in the kitchen garden, and she heard them before she saw the dust, and she straightened up and didn't run to the cabin for cover. She walked there, because running told them something about you that you couldn't take back. Thomas came out of the barn. He counted them 2 4-riders. Cole's man in front, a new face beside him in a dark coat, who had the particular look of a town lawyer doing something he'd convinced himself was legal. Hayes, the lawyer said. I'm Arthur Dean, representing Mr. Cole's interests. I have a county sheriff's order requiring you to... Who's the sheriff? Thomas said. Dean blinked. Pardon. What sheriff signed that order? Bitter Creek's sheriff is Ed Mackey, and he's been in bed with a broken leg for 6 weeks. Thomas's voice was quiet and absolutely level. So, whose signature is on that paper? Dean looked at the paper in his hand with the expression of a man who had just discovered a problem he should have found earlier. Deputy. Deputy's got no authority to issue property orders, Thomas said. Bring me an order signed by a legitimate county officer or get off my land. Mr. Hayes, I strongly advise you. Mr. Dean. Thomas took 1 step forward. You're a lawyer. Look at that paper and tell me truthfully whether it would survive a federal court review. Dean looked at the paper again. His mouth thinned. That's what I thought, Thomas said. Ride back and tell Cole that I'm aware of the procedural problem with his method and that I've retained my own legal consultation. He wasn't lying. Calvin Marsh's affidavit was on its way to Denver with Jim Heller at that very moment. When he's ready to have a legitimate conversation, he knows where I am. The cold-eyed man behind Dean had been watching this entire exchange with an expression that had moved slowly from patience to something less patient. He moved his horse forward. Hayes, he said, we're past the paper stage. And then it happened fast. The shot came from the tree line, not aimed at Thomas, not aimed at anyone in particular. A warning shot fired low, kicking up dirt 6 feet in front of Thomas's boots. The horses shied. Someone shouted. Thomas moved without hesitation toward Rebecca, putting himself between her and the trees, and in doing so, he caught the edge of something she didn't see. Exactly what a panicked horse's movement, the cold-eyed man's horse lunging sideways, and the horse caught him with its shoulder-full momentum, and Thomas went down hard. She was beside him before the dust settled. Thomas. She was on her knees. Her hands found him, his shoulder, his chest. He was breathing. He was conscious. His face was white with a shock that was moving fast toward pain. Thomas, look at me. He looked at her. His eyes were clear. I'm all right, he said. You're not all right. I'm not dead, he said. That's the better category. He tried to sit up and made a sound that he cut off very quickly. The sound of a man who has decided that making sounds about pain is something he will not do in front of witnesses. Your shoulder, she said. She could tell from the angle from the way his arm lay. Something wrong in there. Not a bullet, not that, but the horse's weight and the fall. Don't move it. Rebecca. I said don't move it. She looked up. Dean and two of the riders had pulled back. The cold-eyed man was still there, his horse turned sideways watching. His expression was not quite what she expected. Not satisfaction, something more unsettled. That wasn't supposed to happen, he said. No, she said, looking at him with every degree of cold she had ever cultivated in 24 years of learning to survive men she couldn't afford to fear. It wasn't. And Calvin Marsh's affidavit is going to make sure a federal court knows the full sequence of events, including this one. She held the man's gaze. Cole bought a county clerk. He didn't buy the federal government, and you just gave us a witness event that I will personally describe in writing to the territorial marshal's office before this evening is out. She had no idea if that would work. She said it like she was certain. The cold-eyed man looked at her for a long moment. Then he reined his horse around and rode back toward the tree line. Dean followed without a word. The yard went quiet. Thomas was watching her. Still on the ground, still white around the mouth, but watching her with that look, the direct, unguarded one. Territorial Marshal's office, he said. I've never been so glad to sound confident about something I'm figuring out as I go, she said. Is Heller going to make Denver? He's got 2 days head start, she said, and Cole doesn't know who he is. She helped Thomas sit up carefully, one hand behind his good shoulder. He made no sound this time. Can you stand? Yes. Let me help you. I don't. Thomas. She looked at him directly. Let me help you. He let her. He leaned on her and stood, and she felt the weight of him solid and real, and more than she'd let herself think about, and she walked him toward the cabin, step by step, her shoulder under his good arm, and she didn't say anything else until he was sitting in the chair at the kitchen table. She examined his shoulder with hands that knew what they were doing. She'd set her own dislocated finger twice without any help, and she'd watched the traveling doc work on old Prather's arm in Bitter Creek the winter before. The shoulder wasn't fully dislocated. The muscles were wrong, and something had torn. This is going to hurt, she said. Most things do, he said. She worked quickly and efficiently, and he endured it with the determined silence of a man who would sooner absorb any amount of pain than let it show. When she finished and had his arm bound against his body with a strip of clean linen, she sat back and looked at him. His face was still pale. His eyes were very dark. Why did you do that? She asked. He knew what she was asking. He looked at her for a moment in which something passed between them that was not easy to name, something too real and too present to be deflected with a simple answer. Same reason I stopped in that street, he said finally. Because I saw something that mattered, and I wasn't going to stand aside. She looked at him. He looked back. The kitchen was very quiet. You scared me, she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for protecting me. I'm apologizing for scaring you, he said. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Same difference you keep pointing out to me, I think. She looked away first, stood up, went to the stove because she needed something to do with her hands. Heller has to make Denver, she said. He'll make it, Thomas said. And the marshal? Rebecca. She stopped, turned. He was looking at her across the kitchen with his arm bound and his face still pale and his dark eyes steady. Thank you, he said. Not just for today, for all of it. The garden and the documents and Millhaven and... He stopped, started again more carefully. Nobody's stood in this yard with me before. Not really. Not in 2 years. She held his gaze. Her chest was doing something she didn't have a word for. You need to eat something, she said, and rest that shoulder. Yes, ma'am, he said. Quiet, almost gentle. She turned back to the stove. Her hands were very steady. Outside, the summer evening gathered itself across the high country in its slow and magnificent way, and the mountain held its peace. And somewhere 40 miles east, a rider named Jim Heller was pushing hard toward Denver with a piece of paper that could change everything. Cole would move again. They both knew it. But tonight, the cabin was warm, and the shoulder was bound, and two people who had each spent years surviving alone were for the first time not surviving alone. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Thomas slept badly. Rebecca knew because she didn't sleep at all. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low, and Calvin Marsh's copy of the affidavit, the duplicate he'd pressed into her hands at the door. Always keep a second one, girl. Always spread flat in front of her, and she read it 3 times until she had every line memorized. Not because she needed to memorize it, because her mind needed something to hold on to that wasn't the image of Thomas going down in the dirt with a horse's weight behind him. She'd been afraid before. She knew what fear felt like, the cold, practical kind that kept you moving, kept you making decisions. What she'd felt in that yard was different, sharper, located somewhere specific in her chest, rather than spread evenly through her body the way survival fear was. She didn't examine that too closely. Not yet. At dawn, she heard him moving in the back room. Slow, careful movements, the sounds of a man navigating pain with deliberate patience. She had coffee ready when he appeared in the doorway. He was dressed, his arms still bound, his face carrying the particular weathered pallor of a poor night. He looked at the papers on the table, then at her. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Coffee's ready," she said. "Rebecca. Sit down, Thomas. Your shoulder needs another day before you try to be useful with it." She poured the cup and set it in front of the chair. "Sit." He sat. He picked up the coffee. He looked at her across the table with that measuring quality, and this time there was something else underneath it, something warmer and more careful, like a man who has revised his understanding of a situation and is still working out what to do with the revision. "Jim Heller should be in Denver by now," she said. "If the weather held." "The weather held. I checked the sky yesterday, no front coming." She sat across from him. "The Federal Land Office opens at 8. If he gets there this morning, we could have a response by wire within 2 days." "Cole won't wait 2 days," Thomas said. "No," she agreed. "He won't." They both sat with that for a moment. "The county deputy," she said. "The one who signed the property order. Do you know him? Pete Vance. He's been Cole's man for 3 years. Did odd work for him before Cole got him the deputy badge." Thomas turned the coffee cup. "Why? Because Vance signing that order is illegal and he knows it. And a man who knows he's done something illegal is a man who's afraid." She looked at Thomas steadily. "Afraid men make mistakes. And afraid men talk if they think the alternative is worse than talking." Thomas looked at her. "You want to approach Vance." "I want to have a conversation with Pete Vance," she said, "before Cole gets to him and tells him to keep quiet." "That's..." He stopped. "What?" "That's either very smart or very dangerous." "It's both," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She held his gaze. "I grew up managing a man who was unpredictable and prone to anger. I know how to read a room, Thomas. And I know how to talk to someone who's scared." He was quiet for a long moment. The morning light came through the window and found his face, and she could see him working through it, the calculation, the concern, the thing underneath the concern that he was still being careful about. "Not alone," he said finally. "Your shoulder." "I said not alone." His voice was quiet and absolute. "My arm's bound, not my legs. I can ride." He set down the coffee cup. "We go together, or we don't go." She looked at him. His jaw was set in that way she'd come to recognize the look of a man who had made a decision and built a wall around it. There was no productive argument to be had against that expression. "All right," she said. "Together." Pete Vance was not a hard man to find. He was the kind of deputy who spent more time at the Bitter Creek Saloon than at the jail, and it was barely 9 in the morning when they found him at the far end of the bar, nursing something that wasn't coffee. His badge pinned crooked on a vest that had seen better decades. He saw them come in. She watched his face cycle through 3 expressions in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then the thing she'd been counting on, a flash of something cornered and unhappy behind his eyes. "Vance," Thomas said. "Hayes." Vance set down his glass with exaggerated steadiness. "What happened to your arm?" "Your employer's horse," Thomas said pleasantly. "How's your morning?" "I'm off duty." "I can see that." Thomas settled onto the bar stool, one removed from Vance's, easy and unhurried, like a man with nowhere pressing to be. "We just want to talk." Vance's eyes moved to Rebecca, stayed there a beat too long. "Who's she?" "She's the woman who's going to save you significant legal trouble," Rebecca said, taking the stool on Vance's other side, boxing him in without making it look like boxing him in. "If you're interested." "I don't need saving from anything." "You signed a property removal order without authority to do so," she said. "That's a territorial offense, abuse of office. If this goes to a federal court, which it's going to, within the week, your signature on that paper is the first thing a federal judge is going to see." Vance's jaw tightened. "Cole told me it was routine." "Cole tells people a lot of things," Thomas said. "Some of them are even true." "I just signed the paper." Vance picked up his glass again. "That's all I did." "Pete." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Her voice dropped, not threatening, something more effective than threatening. Confidential, like she was giving him something precious. "That paper is already in a federal affidavit. Your name is already in it. The only question right now is whether you're in that affidavit as someone Cole used, or someone who chose to cooperate with a federal investigation." She paused. "Those are 2 very different positions to be in." Vance stared at his glass. His hand wasn't quite steady. "There's no federal investigation," he said. "There will be," she said, "by the end of this week." Silence. The bartender had found something to do at the far end of the bar that required his complete attention. "What do you want from me?" Vance asked. Very quiet. The question of a man who has already made his decision but needs someone to make it slightly easier. "One thing," Rebecca said. "Who does Cole use at the county land office, the clerk, the one who altered the survey record?" Vance's head came up. "How do you know about—" "Who is it, Pete?" Another silence, shorter this time. "Man named Giddens," Vance said, staring at the bar top. "Roy Giddens. Cole's had him on salary for 2 years. Whatever Cole needs moved, filed, changed, Giddens does it." He swallowed. "I didn't know about the survey until it was done. I want that on the record." "It'll be on the record," Rebecca said. "Roy Giddens. Is he still at the land office?" "Far as I know." She stood. Thomas stood beside her. "Vance," Thomas said, "I'd stay away from Cole for the next few days if I were you." Vance laughed, short and humorless. "That's real easy advice to give." "I know," Thomas said, not unkindly. "But I mean it." They were outside and halfway to the horses before Thomas spoke. "Roy Giddens," he said. "If Giddens panics and destroys the county record before the federal examiner gets here, then we've got nothing but Marsh's affidavit and a forger who's had time to clean up after himself." Thomas finished. "We need to move." She untied the mare's reins. "Now, before Cole hears we talk to Vance." "Where?" She looked at him. "The county land office. We need a witness present in that building who can testify that the record existed and was not destroyed." "Rebecca, we can't just—" "We can ask to view a public record," she said. "That's a legal right. Any person can walk into a county land office and request to view a filed document." She swung up into the saddle. "And if Giddens is in there, and he knows someone is looking at that document in person, he can't destroy it without a witness to the destruction." Thomas looked at her for a long moment from the ground. "You've thought about this for a while," he said. I thought about it at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, she said. Are you coming? He got on Buck, one-handed, with the controlled economy of a man who will not let a bound arm make him look like less than himself. It cost him, she could see that, but he made it look easy. They rode to the county land office. Roy Giddens was a thin man, with nervous hands, and the look of someone who slept poorly on a permanent basis. He was behind his counter when they walked in, and the moment he saw Thomas Hayes, his face did something complicated and rapid. Surprise, then calculation, then a forced blankness that didn't quite cover the fear underneath. Mr. Hayes, he said. What can I'd like to view the survey record for the Hayes spread parcel, Thomas said. Filed under the land grant of 1873. Giddens's hands stilled on the counter. That file is a matter of public record, Rebecca said, which any citizen has the right to examine during business hours. It's 9:15 on a weekday morning. She looked at him with pleasant, implacable calm. Is there a problem? Giddens looked from her to Thomas. He wet his lips. No, he said. No problem. He went to get the file. He was gone 4 minutes, long enough that Rebecca's heart was doing something unpleasant in her chest, and then he came back with a folder and he set it on the counter, and he did not meet either of their eyes. Thomas opened the folder. He studied the document inside. His expression gave nothing away, but she saw his jaw shift slightly. He turned the folder so she could see. The survey record was there. Original. The county version, the forged one. And someone between yesterday and this morning had attempted to make corrections to it. Small ones. Subtle. The kind of alterations that required a magnifying glass and Calvin Marsh's expertise to detect. But they were there, new ink on old paper, and now they were there while two witnesses were looking directly at them. Mr. Giddens, Rebecca said, keeping her voice very even, I need you to note in your logbook that Thomas Hayes and Rebecca Daniels examined this document today at 9:17 in the morning. She looked up. That's a standard procedure, isn't it? Logging who views what documents. Giddens looked like a man who had just realized the floor was not where he thought it was. Yes, he said. That's standard. Please do that now, she said. We'll wait. He wrote in the log. His hand wasn't steady. They both watched him write. Thomas closed the folder and slid it back across the counter. He touched the brim of his hat to Giddens with an expression that was almost kind. Much obliged, he said. They were back outside before either of them let out a full breath. He's going to wire Cole the minute we're down the street, Thomas said. Yes, she said. And Cole's going to know that we've got a dated log entry proving the document existed and was viewed this morning, which means if it disappears now, the disappearance itself becomes evidence. She looked at Thomas. We just locked that document in place without touching it. Thomas looked at her. It was the look she'd been seeing more frequently now, the one where the measurement had stopped and something more direct had taken its place. Where did you learn to think like this? He asked. I spent 3 years with nothing but time and a bad situation, she said. You learn to work with what you've got. They were riding back toward the spread when the wire caught up with them. Literally, the telegraph boy from Bitter Creek's station came galloping down the main street, calling Thomas's name, waving a yellow envelope like it was on fire. Thomas took it, opened it one-handed. He read it twice. Then he handed it to Rebecca without a word. It was from the Federal Land Office in Denver. Jim Heller had arrived. The request had been received. A federal land examiner was being dispatched to Millhaven within 48 hours to review the Hayes spread boundary claim. All parties were directed to cease any property action pending the federal examination. She read it, read it again, looked up at Thomas. His face was doing something she hadn't seen from it before, a loosening deep and thorough, like a man who has been braced against something for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight without the brace. 48 hours, she said. 48 hours, he agreed. Cole's going to move before that examiner arrives. Yes. He folded the wire and put it inside his coat next to his heart, which she thought was probably not intentional, but which she noticed anyway. "He's going to move tonight." "Then we don't go back to the spread alone," she said. He looked at her. "Jim Heller's not the only man who owes you favors," she said. "You told me that first week. Patterson's crew, the Oleander brothers up north. Old Marcus Webb, who you helped pull through the winter before last." She held his gaze. "How many people in this county do you actually know, Thomas?" He thought about it. "Enough," he said slowly. "Then tonight, we don't stand alone." She kept her voice steady and her eyes on him. "You've spent 2 years out here being solitary about everything. That's done now. Call in what people owe you. Let them stand with us." Something moved in his expression, old resistance meeting something new, and the new thing winning. "You're a hard woman to argue with," he said. "I've had practice," she said. "Go, ride to Patterson's first, they're closest. I'll go to Webb." She gathered the mare's reins. "Meet back at the spread by 4. "Rebecca." His voice stopped her. She looked back. He was looking at her with complete directness. No guard, no careful distance. Just Thomas Hayes, looking at her across a dusty Bitter Creek street in the full noon sun, his arm bound and his face still pale at the edges, more honest than she thought she'd ever seen a man look at her. "Be careful," he said. "Please." She held his gaze for 1 moment. 2. "I'll see you at 4, she said. She rode. Marcus Webb was 71 years old, built like a winter-stripped tree, and had the personality of a man who'd earned the right to say exactly what he thought and exercised that right continuously. He listened to Rebecca's account standing in his barn doorway without moving or speaking, which was, she'd learned, how old men with good judgment processed information. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Cole's been after this valley for 10 years, he said. "Figured he'd get Hayes eventually. Hayes is too stubborn to buy and too honest to bribe. He's also got a federal examiner coming in 48 hours, she said. Webb looked at her with sharp, pale eyes. "That right?" "That's right." "And you're the woman he bought out of Bitter Creek," Webb said. "Not unkindly, just direct the way old men get when they've given up softening things." "I'm the woman who works his spread," she said. "And I need to know if you're willing to stand with him tonight." Webb was quiet again. Then he turned back into the barn and hollered for his 2 ranch hands, who appeared from somewhere in the back with the speed of men who'd learned not to keep the old man waiting. "Saddle up," Webb said. "We're riding to Hayes's place." She almost said thank you. What she said instead was, "I'll tell him you're coming," which Webb seemed to appreciate more. By the time she rode back to the spread at 3:30, Thomas was already there. And he hadn't come back alone. 6 men stood in the yard. Patterson had sent 3 hands. The Oleander brothers, 2 of them, big and quiet and steady-eyed, had come themselves. Jim Heller's cousin, who she didn't know, had apparently just shown up because he'd heard and felt like it was the right thing to do. Thomas was standing with them, still one-armed, still pale, talking with the particular quietness of a man who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He looked up when she rode in. He counted the men behind her Webb and his 2 hands, and something in his face shifted. 8, he said. 9 counting you, she said. 10 counting me. You're not Thomas. She dismounted. I have a better eye and a steadier hand than half the men in this yard, and you know it. Don't make this the conversation where you say something foolish. He looked at her, looked away. All right, he said. 10. Marcus Webb pulled up and looked at the gathered men and then at Thomas. Boy, he said, which was what he called everyone under 65. You've got good people standing with you. I do, Thomas said. And he glanced at Rebecca when he said it briefly, the way a man glances at something he's still getting used to having. She looked away first, but her chest was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. Cole came at dusk, not with lawyers, not with papers. He came with 8 riders and a kind of arrogance that Rebecca recognized immediately. The arrogance of a man who has always had enough money to make problems disappear and has forgotten that money has a limit. They stopped at the edge of the yard. Cole himself was in front. She'd never seen him before, but she knew him instantly the way you know a type of man when you've been managing that type your whole life. Comfortable, entitled, genuinely surprised to count the people standing between him and what he wanted. "Hayes," Cole said. "This doesn't need to—" "There's a federal examiner coming from Denver," Thomas said. 48 hours. You've seen the wire by now. I know Giddens sent it." He paused. "Roy Giddens is going to have a long conversation with a federal investigator about that survey record, and Pete Vance already told us your name." Cole's expression didn't collapse. Men like Cole didn't collapse in front of witnesses. But something behind his eyes shifted the quick recalculation of a man who has realized the ground is different than he thought. "You can't prove the record was changed," Cole said. "Calvin Marsh can," Rebecca said. "And he'll be delighted to explain to a federal court exactly how recently it was done and by what method and what the original survey says." She kept her voice level. "You used a county clerk and a deputy badge, Mr. Cole. Those are thin instruments for the kind of fraud you've been running. A federal court is going to see right through them." Cole looked at her with the look that men like him reserved for people who weren't supposed to be talking cold and slightly amazed. "Who are you?" he said. "I'm the woman who runs this spread," she said. "And I'm the woman who's going to be in that courtroom when this goes to federal trial." Cole looked around the yard. He looked at Webb, who he clearly recognized. He looked at the Oleander brothers. He counted the way Thomas had counted. "This isn't over," he said. "Mathematically," Thomas said quietly, "I believe it is." Cole held his gaze for a long moment. Then without another word he turned his horse and his men turned with him, and they rode back into the darkening country from which they'd come. The yard was very quiet. Then Marcus Webb made a sound that might have been a laugh. 10 years trying to get that man off this valley," he said to no one in particular. "Took a woman with a land deed and a bad attitude." Several of the men laughed. Rebecca felt the tension break in the yard like a physical thing, like a rope snapping. Thomas turned to her. His face was still composed, still careful, but his eyes were doing something unguarded and unmanaged, something she had no framework to look at directly without feeling the full weight of it. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "I've been better," he said. "I've also been a great deal worse." "Your shoulder is attached," he said, "which is all I require of it at present." She looked at him standing there in the last light of the day, one-armed and undefeated, and entirely himself. And she felt something settle in her chest, like the last piece of something clicking into place. Not sudden, not dramatic, just the quiet, solid recognition of a truth she'd been circling for weeks, without letting herself get close enough to name it. She turned away before her face could say something she wasn't ready to say out loud. "I'll start supper," she said. "We've got 9 men to feed." 10, Thomas said behind her. She kept walking, but she was smiling, and the high country evening gathered itself around the Hayes spread, like it always did, slow and golden patient, as the mountain itself waiting for 2 careful people to finally say the thing they both already knew. They fed 9 men that night, and nobody went home hungry. Rebecca cooked until her arms ached, and didn't mind a single minute of it, because the sound of voices in the yard, real voices, men eating and talking and existing in the ordinary way of people who had just done something worth doing together, was a sound she hadn't known she was starving for until she heard it. Webb stayed longest sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee and occasional observations about Cole's character that grew more colorful as the evening wore on. The Oleander brothers left quietly the way they'd come. Patterson's men said their goodbyes with the easy warmth of people who expected to see her again, which she noticed more than she let show. Thomas saw the last of them out just past 9. She heard him in the yard, low voices, the sounds of horses moving off into the dark. She was washing the dishes when he came back inside. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at her back. "You should sit down," he said. "You've been on your feet since before dawn." "I'll sit when the dishes are done." "I'll finish the dishes." "With one arm." "I'm resourceful," he said. She turned around. He was leaning in the doorframe with his good shoulder against the wood. His bound arm held carefully at his side, and he was watching her with that look, the direct one, the unguarded one, the one that had been getting harder to look at directly for the past 2 weeks. "Sit down, Thomas," she said quietly. "Please." He sat. She finished the dishes. The kitchen settled into its night sounds. The pop of the stove cooling the occasional voice of the wind off the mountain. The small, solid noises of a house doing what houses do. She dried her hands and sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "It's not over," she said finally. "Cole's not going to just walk away." "No," Thomas agreed. "But he's going to walk carefully. A man with a federal examiner coming and a forger on his payroll who's already nervous doesn't make bold moves." He paused. "He'll try something with lawyers, something slow." "Slow we can handle," she said. "We've got Marsh's affidavit and a log entry and Vance's statement and Jim Heller's testimony about the Denver filing." She looked at the table. "Slow we can fight." "Yes," he said. "We can." She looked up at the word we. He was looking at her steadily, and she understood that he had chosen that word with full awareness of what it meant, and that he was waiting patient and careful, as he was about everything, to see what she would do with it. She wasn't ready. She almost was, but almost wasn't there yet, and Thomas Hayes was the kind of man who would wait without making the waiting uncomfortable. "I should sleep," she said. "You should," he said. "You rode 80 miles today." 40 each way. 80, he said. "I can add." She almost smiled. She stood, and he stood with her. And she was close enough that she could see the fatigue in his face, the particular worn quality of a man who'd spent a day in pain that he'd refused to acknowledge, and before she could stop herself, she reached out and put her hand briefly against his jaw. Just a moment. Just long enough to feel the warmth of his face against her palm. He went absolutely still. She stepped back. "Sleep," she said. Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. "Yes, ma'am," he said, very quiet. She went to the cabin. She lay on top of the blanket in the dark and looked at the ceiling and pressed her hand against her own face where the warmth still lived in her palm. And she told herself, as she had told herself at the start of every hard thing in her life, that she would deal with this tomorrow. She was asleep in 4 minutes. It was, she reflected, just before she went under the first night. In 3 years, she hadn't lain awake listening for sounds that meant danger. The federal examiner arrived not 48 hours later, but 36, which was either efficiency or urgency. And the fact that it was urgency became clear when he introduced himself on the Hayes Spreads porch and said his name was Agent Carlisle, and that he'd come directly from Denver on the territorial governor's instruction, and not merely the land offices, which was a different and significantly more serious thing. He was a compact, precise man who looked at everything twice before he touched it, and asked questions in a sequence that told you he already had a substantial number of the answers. He spent 2 hours with the documents. He spent another hour with Calvin Marsh, who had ridden up from Millhaven with Dorothea in tow, and who laid out his expert testimony with the particular pleasure of a retired man given meaningful work. Rebecca watched Thomas during all of this. He sat where Carlisle directed him and answered questions directly, and didn't embellish and didn't minimize. And she thought that if she'd been designing a man to withstand official scrutiny, she couldn't have designed him better. He was just so plainly telling the truth that the truth was almost visible in the air around him. When it was her turn, Carlisle looked at her with sharp assessor's eyes. "You're the one who identified the notation error in the forged survey," he asked. Calvin Marsh identified it, she said. I brought the document to him. How did you know to bring it to a federal surveyor? Because a county clerk can be bought, she said. And a federal surveyor can't be easily bought. And when you're trying to prove something that someone with money doesn't want, proved you find the people who money can't reach. Carlyle looked at her for a moment. You have legal training. No, she said. I have a mother who believed in reading, and a father who gave me a lot of time to think. Carlyle made a note. She had no idea what he wrote. That evening, Carlyle rode to Millhaven to begin what he called a formal records review of the county land office, which was the official language for what everyone in the room understood to mean Roy Giddens was about to have a very bad week. Thomas walked Carlyle out. Rebecca stayed on the porch. When Thomas came back up the steps, the spring was gone out of the air. Just the still warmth of a summer evening, and the two of them on a porch that had gotten comfortable with having two people on it. He's going to find everything, Thomas said. Yes, she said. Cole's entire operation, not just the survey. Once they pull on that thread, it unravels, she said. Yes, she looked at her hands. How many other spreads do you think Cole's pulled this on? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Enough that a federal investigation isn't going to be quick. No, she agreed. It's not. They sat on the porch steps in the fading light and didn't talk for a while, and the comfortable silence was back different now than it had been in those first days. Fuller, like a room that has been lived in long enough to take on the personality of the people inside it. Rebecca. Thomas's voice was careful, deliberate. The voice of a man who has decided to say something he has been working up to for longer than the conversation suggests. She waited. Your wages, he said. She looked at him. What about them? You've been here 6 weeks. Your arrangement was a job. A job has an end point, or at least a choice point. He was looking at the yard, not at her, which she understood was the only way he could say what he was saying. I don't want you to stay because Cole made leaving complicated, or because you feel obligated for some reason. He paused. I want you to stay because you want to be here. And if you don't, if you'd rather go somewhere else now that the threat is reduced, I meant what I said that first day. Train fare. Any direction. She looked at his profile in the evening light. Thomas, she said. Look at me. He turned. His face was open in a way she hadn't seen before, stripped of the careful management, the patience, the studied distance. Just him wearing the look of a man who has said the vulnerable thing and has no idea what happens next. I moved the flour away from the salt pork, she said. I reorganized your pantry and mended your porch screen and identified 3 places your roof is going to fail in October. And I know exactly which posts in the south fence need to be replaced before winter and in what order. She held his gaze. I am not going anywhere. He looked at her for a long, full moment. You could have just said yes, he said. I wanted to be specific, she said. You're a man who appreciates specific. Something broke open in his face, not dramatically, not with any of the grand gestures that stories like to put in this kind of moment. Just a quiet, thorough easing like a fist finally unclenching. He reached out and took her hand where it rested on the step between them, just picked it up and held it warm and steady, saying nothing. She turned her palm up and held on. They sat like that while the light finished going and the mountain went dark against the stars, and nobody said anything else because nothing else needed saying tonight. The federal investigation into Garrett Cole's land fraud operation broke open 2 weeks later, like a rotten beam finally giving way under its own weight. Roy Giddens talked first. He talked for 3 hours to Agent Carlyle and 2 territorial investigators, and what he said was specific and documented and devastating, because Roy Giddens was a man who had never intended to be a criminal and had spent 2 years telling himself a lie about that, and the moment someone official gave him permission to stop lying, he stopped. Pete Vance made a formal statement the following day. He brought a folder of papers he'd been keeping quietly for 18 months, payments orders, records of conversations, the particular insurance of a man who knew what he was involved in and had been quietly terrified of it. Cole was arrested on a Thursday morning outside the Rafter Sea. 2 federal marshals and a territorial sheriff's deputy. All the gravity of the law arriving at once with the unhurried confidence of people who have enough paper to back up every single word they're about to say. Thomas heard about it from Jim Heller, who rode up to the spread, grinning with the news. Rebecca was in the kitchen garden when Heller came in hollering, and she stood up and listened and felt something move through her that wasn't quite triumph, something quieter and more durable than triumph. The satisfaction of a thing being set right. The particular relief of a wrong that has been corrected instead of simply absorbed. Thomas came to find her in the garden after Heller left. She was back on her knees between the pepper rows pulling weeds because the garden didn't stop needing attention just because justice had been done. "Cole's arrested," he said. "I heard." He crouched beside her. She could feel him looking at her profile. "You don't look surprised," he said. "I'm not surprised," she said. "I'm relieved. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Surprised means you weren't sure it would happen. I was sure." She held his gaze. "I was sure because we did every single thing right, Thomas. Every step. The affidavit, the log entry, Vance's statement, Heller getting to Denver." She paused. "When you do every single thing right, the outcome follows. It doesn't always feel like it will, but it does." He looked at her with that expression she'd stopped trying to look away from. "My deed's clear," he said. "I know. The spread is mine, legally, federally, completely mine." "I know." "Ours," he said. Very quiet. Just the one word said with all the careful intention of a man who uses words precisely. Her breath stopped. She looked at him. "That's a different conversation from the one we had on the porch," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." "Thomas, I'm not rushing you," he said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. I am not rushing you toward anything. You've had enough men in your life making decisions for you, and I will not be another one." He held her gaze steadily. "I'm telling you what I want. I'm telling you clearly because you deserve clear. And then whatever you decide, I'll respect it." She looked at him for a long moment. The garden was warm around them, peppers and beans, and the summer smell of growing things, and Thomas Hayes was crouching in the dirt beside her, without any pretense of dignity, saying the true thing with the directness of a man who had decided that honesty was the only currency worth spending. "You said you weren't a man who planted things and walked away from them," she said. "I said I was trying not to be," he said. "There's a difference." "I know." She looked at her hands. "I've been waiting," she said, "for the thing that's wrong with you. The thing that explains why you make sense on the outside and then doesn't when you get close enough." She looked up at him. "I can't find it." "I've got things wrong with me," he said. "I know you do. So do I." She held his gaze. "I mean the kind of wrong that's underneath everything. The kind that means you can't trust the outside of a person because the inside is something different." She shook her head slightly. "You don't have that kind. I've been watching for it for 6 weeks and you don't have it." He was quiet. Something moved in his eyes, deep and complex, and more honest than she was entirely prepared for. "Margaret used to say I was easier to trust than to know," he said, "that I kept too much on the inside." "She wasn't wrong," Rebecca said. "You do." She reached out and touched his face the way she had that night on the porch, her palm against his jaw, warm and deliberate. "But you let me see the inside. I don't think you do that easily." "No," he said, "I don't." "Then I think," she said, "that ours is a word I can use." He put his hand over hers where it rested against his face, just held it there. His eyes were dark and very clear. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm specific," she said, "which is the same thing for me." He turned his head slightly and pressed his lips to her palm, brief and warm and deliberate. And then he stood and held out his hand, and she took it and stood beside him in the kitchen garden in the full summer noon, with the mountain enormous at their backs, and the spread stretching out honest and real in every direction. "The north fence needs checking," he said. "I know," she said. "I was going to do it this afternoon." "I'll come with you." "Your shoulder is significantly better," he said. "And I want to come with you." He looked at her. "I want to do most things with you if that's all right." "It's all right," she said. They walked out of the garden together, her hand in his, not making anything larger out of it than it was two people who had decided to stop being alone, walking toward the next thing that needed doing on a piece of land that was theirs and clean and entirely their own. The federal case against Garrett Cole took 4 months to conclude and resulted in charges against Cole Giddens and 2 additional county officials whose names had come up in Giddens's testimony. The county land office was audited. 3 other spreads were found to have been affected by Cole's forged survey operation, and their owners, 2 widows, and an elderly rancher who had been fighting the county for 2 years had their deeds restored. Rebecca wrote all 3 of them letters. She didn't know them, but she knew what it felt like to have something taken from you by someone with more money and less conscience, and she knew what it felt like when someone extended a hand across that kind of trouble. She wrote the letters on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table, while Thomas sat across from her doing accounts, and when she finished the last one, she looked up to find him watching her. "Who are you writing?" he asked. People who needed to hear it wasn't just them, she said. That someone was paying attention. He looked at her for a moment. "You're remarkable," he said. Simply. The way he said everything without performance, without decoration, like a man who has decided the truth is enough. She felt warmth move through her from her chest outward. "Don't tell me that," she said. "I'll get vain." "You won't," he said. "You're constitutionally incapable of vain." He turned back to his accounts. "I'm going to marry you," he said in exactly the same tone he'd used to say the north fence needs checking. She stared at him. "That's not a question." "No," he said. He looked up. "I'm telling you what I intend. The asking comes separately, properly, when I've thought about how to do it right." He held her gaze. "I wanted you to know the intention, because you've had enough things in your life decided without your knowledge." She looked at him across the table, this quiet, careful, gray-templed man, with his honest accounts, and his bound-up shoulder, and his dead wife, and his mountain, and his absolute refusal to be anything other than exactly what he was, and something in her chest that had been braced for 24 years finally fully let go. "All right," she said. "All right, you'll wait for the proper asking." "All right to all of it," she said. "Thomas." He looked at her. "I would have said yes in the garden," she said. "I just wanted you to know." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned back to his accounts, with the barest curve at the corner of his mouth. The smile that wasn't quite a smile, the one she had come to understand, was his version of joy, careful and real, and entirely his own. Outside, the high country summer burned its last great heat across the land, and the kitchen garden stood ordered and thriving, and the south fence ran clean and true along its proper line, and the mountain held its ancient peace over all of it, over the cabin and the barn and the porch and the well, and 2 people sitting at a table in the easy silence of those who have nothing left to hide from each other. Rebecca Daniels had come to this place with nothing but a rented mare and a lifetime of surviving things that should have broken her. She had stayed because she chose to. She had fought because it was right. She had loved because, in the end, Thomas Hayes had shown her what it looked like when someone stayed, not because they were paid to, not because they had to, but because they had looked at her and decided plainly, and with full knowledge, that she was worth staying for. And Rebecca, who had spent 24 years learning to survive alone, had finally at last learned something harder and more necessary than survival. She had learned how to let someone in. That was the real land, not the 300 acres with the clean deed and the honest survey. That was the territory that had always mattered, the one no one could forge, and no one could take, the ground that only opens for people willing to do the slow and frightening work of trust. She had done that work, and it had given her everything.